Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I saw a couple of posts. I think lots of us saw numerous posts this last couple of days about some controversial comments that a CNN journalist, Don Lemon, made about Nikki Haley, who announced her candidacy for president of the United States, or at least nomination by the Republican Party for president of the United States, and issues regarding her age. And I saw some really impassioned comments by someone I know who I've had the pleasure of interviewing before, Dr. Chitra Anand, who is a managing director of ESG and Impact. She's a professor at Centennial College. She's an author. She's a keynote speaker. She's a recipient of a Changemakers Award. And she's someone that on social media comments and controversially comments on some interesting comments. And so I thought it would be really helpful and interesting to check in with her. So Dr. Anand, Chitra, thank you for joining us. Tell us, if you could, what Don Lemon said and what you thought about his comment.
Well, I mean, I think it's quite interesting. I think there's been a general reaction by the world, if you will, around women in their prime. And he refers back to sort of a definition on Google. Women are in their prime based on a certain age, which is the 20s, 30s, and 40s. And I think that it was absolutely certain that there's, what was said was, generally not received well overall by the world, I would say. But I think more importantly, there's a couple of things that really stood out to me, Brian. And number one, I think it's a general fatigue by women hearing comments about certain notions, ideas, whether it's the positions they take in the workplace. We're having a lot of issues around women with their careers and the pay gap and career progression. We're having, we're seeing women leave the workforce at unprecedented rates at this time. And so I think it's a response in the fatigue of women and the comments that are being made. I mean, at the end of the day, we are 2023 and we're still hearing comments as it relates to women, their capabilities, their skills, the gender limitations, etc. And I think it's just a general fatigue. And it's surprising that we're in 2023 and these comments are being made, but my reaction and sort of my inclination was that I'm not surprised, because we are hearing more and more frequent comments, but also there's a larger movement in the market, which is, something that we refer to as the Great Breakup. I mean, there's an interesting study that was recently done. The Great Breakup. There was a recent, so there was a report that was recently done in partnership with Lean In and McKinsey. And the report is around this notion of the Great Breakup. And it's really around the fact that women are leaving the corporate world and their roles and their careers at unprecedented rates. And so the question, Brian, really becomes why? Why are they leaving? And so when you hear comments like that, it just sends a signal out to the market to say, as much as we're in 2023, have we actually made progress? It doesn't feel like we have. And so there's a discrepancy that sort of presents itself.
So let's go back to what Don Lemon actually said. He said something to the effect of Nikki Haley being in her 50s was past her prime.
Yeah.
I'm trying to find the exact quote here, but that's effectively. And you think that no one should be talking about someone's age. Is that correct?
Well, I think that, if you think about prime, the definition of prime, I think I wrote about that. Prime is a very individual. It varies from person to person, and it really is dependent on someone's overall well-being. And if that's the definition, Brian, who are we to say when somebody's in their prime? And I think that in this modern world that we're living in, we're sort of stuck on old notions. And I think that presents part of the problem. Women are having children later in life. I didn't have my second child till I was 41, pushing 42. I'm pushing 50, and I'm an active athlete. So for someone to make comments about someone's well-being, and in relation to her desire to to be a candidate, is really, it's not anybody's place to do so. And so when you hear such strong statements, everybody kind of gets their back up, saying, wait a second, as much as we need progress in this world, the question becomes, have we actually made that progress?
But it's interesting. So what Don Lemon said, and what he was trying to defend his comments, I guess, is that Nikki Haley had suggested that anyone over the age of 75 should take a competency test. So she was the one that was raising age as the issue. And Lemon said, this talk about age makes me uncomfortable. I think it is the wrong road to go down. She says that politicians or something, are not in their prime. Nikki Haley is not in her prime. Sorry. When a woman is considered to be in her prime is her 20s and 30s and maybe 40s. And then Harlow said, wait, prime for what? And so Don Lemon was, I guess, thinking that he was responding in fashion to Nikki Haley's comment about anyone over the age of 75 may not have the competency and cognitive ability to be president. And then he's saying, but I guess he's saying you're not in your prime either, he's trying to say both age questions are wrong. And what are you saying? Are you agreeing with him that both age questions are wrong, or to say a woman's prime is in their 20s and 30s is wrong?
What I'm saying is, so if you go back to what the question is, her point was for people to take a competency test after the age of 75. That's a logical thing to do, because if you're going to be in a role of such nature, it's really around cognitive capabilities, flexibility, etc. But to respond in that way, and then to take an angle around a woman's age in her prime, when it's such a relative, subjective topic, was not, in my humble opinion, I think it was the wrong approach. So maybe he perhaps may have intended I don't think his point landed well, regardless. So
it certainly didn't land well.
So it was, he was trying to make a point. It absolutely came out, not the way that he was intended to, but, the fact of the matter is, it's really around, what's logical and what's illogical, right? So we have to be careful in terms of the analogies, the terminologies, the language that we use, and in fact, even ideologies. And when we do that, that's a dangerous place to be, Brian, because you're making comparisons that are not apples to apples comparisons, right? So when you're trying to compare ideas and of such, that don't really vet out the way that you want it to vet out. So we have to be very careful in terms of these topics. And when you're talking about women, it just opened up a can of worms, because it presents so many challenges that women are having right now in terms of career progression, and like I said about just the workforce, etc., labels. It's just a massive can of worms that you open up. So you have to be very careful in terms of how you contrast and bring ideas together.
We're going to take a break for some messages and come back in just 2 minutes with Dr. Chitra Anand, a professor at Centennial College and a commentator on lots of different issues, about this issue about really it's about women in the world today and their place today, and comments made that Dr. Anand and others think is inappropriate in regards to when a woman is in her prime, whether that's appropriate to say at all. Stay with us. We're going to be back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting today with Dr. Chitra Anand. She's a professor at Centennial College. She's a commentator, a frequent commentator on a lot of different issues. I've had the pleasure of chatting with her before. I really want to have you on, Dr. Anand, and talk about ESG, because that's one of your specialties, and it's something we've mentioned before that we want to talk about. But today we're talking really about women, and we're coming up to International Women's Day. And you were saying that you thought that women were in a I can't remember the word you used, but not the best place. And you said that we had the great breakup where females were leaving the workforce and disagreeing with the current work environment. I think that we've had lots of commentators comment on the fact that really women in a lot of ways took the brunt of a whole bunch of things during COVID-19, homeschooling, home healthcare, home work, meals, etc. When we were all stuck at home working. I think that females left the workforce. We had a real reduction in workforce participation by females in the last couple of years, and it hasn't gone back up. Some because of economic and challenges with COVID. Some just out of desire that they don't want to work full time for a corporation anymore. But at the same time, now we have someone running for president, or at least for the Republican nomination for president that's female. We had someone run for president in the last 2 elections ago that was a female. We've got a deputy prime minister, minister of finance, first time ever in Canada that's female. Where do you think sort of the status of women is in today's society? I think it's pretty good. You're saying it's not, and people still get away with saying derogatory things?
Well, it's a loaded question, Brian. We've got to take more. It's interesting. I mean, you brought up a really good point about the pandemic, right? I think that women took the brunt of a lot of things during the pandemic. And we talk about the pandemic, you saw businesses decline. And what the pandemic really did was highlight a lot of issues that were already existing. They highlighted issues that already existed. Why? Because of the nature of what took place. But women did take the brunt of it during COVID. Like you said, they had to work. They had to were primary caregivers, had to care for their families. The kids were at home. There was homeschooling. There's meal prep. There's everything that they needed to do. And I think that what COVID did is it really empowered. It kind of rewired their brains in terms of prioritizing what's important to them. I've said this before and I'll say it again. The 2 most valuable commodities that we have as human beings are time and energy. Time and energy, and they deplete, and they're not finite. So women came back after the pandemic less tolerant of toxic environments. They felt empowered to make decisions. And if they're in a workplace or work environment where, you didn't have progress in terms of promotions, in terms of advancement, career advancement, if you didn't have flexibility, we're talking about this whole thing around hybrid, and there's a return to work mandate for a lot of organizations, but we really do need flexibility in order to manage all of the things that we have on our plate, because we are multidimensional. If the culture is not conducive to the values that we embody as not just women, but as human beings, then we are empowered now to make a decision. And that's why you're seeing things like the Great Breakup Report, which just came out with McKinsey and the Lean In organization. And the fact of the matter is that women not are just demanding, but is required more from their work environments, in order to lead. In order to really do your roles well, you really need to have all of those things satisfied in terms of career progression and advancement. And I think what's seeping into work environments is that just people, and women specifically, are becoming less and less tolerant of these, whether they're microaggressions, et cetera. So that's sort of manifesting into that. And I do find, there was a Globe and Mail article that was written not too long ago where you're having a lot of women who are in the financial industry on Bay Street, where they're trying to reach the C-suite. They're actually leaving to take the C-suite jobs in other industries, because those industries are more conducive and more open to that, because climbing that corporate ladder has become so difficult and almost, in their minds, perhaps unattainable. So they're actually self-selecting to leave those organizations to find new opportunities where they can actually feel truly valued and find the types of work environments that they need in order to really flourish, and where their traits and contributions are truly valued from a marketplace perspective, but even from a business perspective.
What's a microaggression?
microaggressions are these very, very subtle comments, whether it's their comments or body language that are demeaning or negative towards an individual, and regardless of gender. So it's it can be commentary, it can be body language, but it's really around these really, really subtle negative comments that are made, and that can be sort of interpreted in multiple ways, but that not in a positive way.
You said that females are less accepting of a toxic work environment. Why would we anytime be accepting of a toxic work environment, and what changed such that people became less accepting of it?
Well, it's an interesting point because, I think that, and I've studied organizations for my dissertation, is that, for so long we've been tolerant of certain behaviors. But I think that even what the pandemic did is it really highlighted certain behaviors. We became closer to our value system. And we've just become less tolerant of certain behaviors. So, I feel that the more experience you get in your career, and I can speak for myself, the closer you become to your value system, the more important culture, values, norms, and behaviors become within those environments. So then you start to self-select on to exit those environments. And so absolutely, no one should be tolerant of an unhealthy work environment. But, as you build your careers, what we tend to do as human beings is we rationalize behaviors because, we want to learn, we want to grow, we want to have opportunities, we want to work with certain peoples, we want to work in certain industries. And, that rationalization the frequency of that starts to decrease as you become, more confident in yourself, as you become more experienced, as you start to develop your skill sets even more. So, that really starts to really shine through as you get more seasoned in your career. And then so you sort of look at sort of the discrepancies that exist within those environments, and then and that becomes more of a prevalent theme as you become more seasoned in your careers.
But you talked also about how several bosses, several companies are mandating a return to office. And that must come from a sense that either when you're at the office, you're more productive and more creative and more collaborative, and there's benefits to being in the office, or take a negative view of it, that if you're at home, I can't control you, and I don't know if you're actually working. You might be out taking care of your kids, and that's a negative.
Well, I mean, here's the truth, is that nothing can replace the human interaction that happens in the office. It's absolutely magical. No one is disputing that whatsoever. People need to be together. They need to collaborate. They need to have connections. They need community. You need to share ideas. You need to brainstorm. And that doesn't happen when you're not in the office. And those relationships are absolutely cemented when you're in the office. But people also need the time for critical thinking, for writing. And that work can be done outside of the office. You can go to a coffee shop. So no one's here to dictate. No one should be dictating how you do your work, who works in what conditions the most effectively or the most productively. I like to, be at home and have some music on and write and think, because that helps my brain function, and my creativity really comes through. And so what the point is that we need to recognize that not just women, but people in general have certain, where they're architects of their days, and they need to be able to cultivate how they spend their time, where they spend their time, what makes most sense. And, whether it's in the office, out of the office, whether it's hybrid, et cetera, et cetera. But we need to empower people, and specifically even women, because if you think of women, they're raising families, they're caregivers, they have to run a household. And so when you think about that and that shared responsibility that they have, that's a lot. So flexibility becomes front and center. And so what the pandemic really showed, Brian, is that we absolutely need that as human beings in order to flourish. I mean, I certainly know that I need that. I need a day or two where I can actually just, take a deep breath and do my thinking, do my writing. The counter to that is that when you're in the office, you've got so much traffic coming by that you actually don't get things done, right? So there's an argument on that side too. So
and
what I'm
I accept
saying,
that, because I find that, when I'm in the office, I get interrupted
yeah,
so often that
absolutely,
I become unproductive. I may
absolutely,
communicate, I may collaborate, but I become
right.
less productive. And so I do need to close my door or stay at home if I want to really focus on something and get it done. I need a few hours of uninterrupted time to really
100%.
focus on things. That said, if you're allowing people to work at home because they're taking care of their kids, because they're going to be taking the kids to doctor's visits, because they're going to be doing all these other things, isn't that a recognition that they're not being as productive for you?
Here's the fact of the matter is that because of the way the world has shifted, Brian, our personal and business lives have converged. Work doesn't end at 5. We don't work these 9 to 5 traditional days. I would argue that it's not the 9 to 5 that's killing people, it's the work structure. Right. So, you tell me, do you stop working after 5? You're getting emails at 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night. Right. So it's fluid. It's fluid.
It's fluid. And one of the issues that I've had recently is that I counted up all the business travel I do. And frankly, the vast majority, if not almost all of my business travel is on my personal time.
Your business travels on your personal time.
Yeah. So I'll work a full day and then I'll fly to some city at 7 o'clock at night.
Well, there you go.
And then I'll fly back. And so all of a sudden I thought all this time that was supposed to be my personal time that I'm actually, I may not be in the office. I may not be on the telephone, but I'm flying. And frankly, I'm on the computer doing stuff.
Absolutely. Right. So the fact of the matter is, our lives have intersected, personal and business. So if I have to take my 8-year-old to a doctor's appointment, at noon, those appointments happen during the workday. And so that means that I'll pick up something else later on, right? So it's much more fluid. And when you allow that fluidity, that's, sort of the magic. And everybody is very unique in terms of how they work, when they work. There's a lot of things that happen. Like I've got aging parents, Brian. I have to attend to them. We're in that sandwich generation. So there's a lot of different things that are happening at once.
You're saying it's the great breakup. So it's primarily females that are encountering this problem.
Yes.
So again, I ask you, doesn't that mean that then, isn't that a negative that companies, business people should be less interested in hiring females because they're going to be doing all these other things? They've got all the other demands.
I think that is just,
is it that they're going to find the time to do the work and we should become less hour focused and more completion of project focused?
I've always been of the mindset, Brian, that it's all about output and outcomes, not about, we're not back into the 70s where we're, stamping in, stamping out in terms of hours that we put in. It's really about outcome-based thinking. And I talk a lot about that in my book. I think that, if you want wonderful people to be working within your organization, you have to recognize that, gone are the days where you're stamping in, stamping out. Like that just doesn't work. I mean, that's just not, great. Important meetings happen after hours sometimes. If you've got a dinner meeting or you've got a client meeting or you want to do a team brainstorm and you want to do it after hours. I mean, the fact of the matter is you have to allow for the fluidity and flexibility for people to do that. And then, it's not just women that have all these responsibilities, but it depends on, the situation at large. So, if you're talking about the great breakup, it's really, if I'm talking about women who are mothers and who have lots of other things that are happening as well. But if you want to attract talent and if you want to have great women in these leadership positions, there's many different things that we have to recognize. There are fundamental things that are important to them, career advancement, the culture of the organization, right? Values in terms of diversity, inclusion, equity, and flexibility. It's a huge component of that. And that is also going to dictate, how you bring in the younger generation, and when what's happening now will also dictate the women and people that come in from the younger generation to take on these roles as well.
We're chatting tonight with Dr. Chitra Anand. She's a professor at Centennial College. She's a commentator on lots of different issues. ESG and women's issues and organizational issues are among them. And recently she commented on a comment that Don Lemon, a host at CNN in the United States, made about women in their prime. And Dr. Anand reacted negatively against that, as lots and lots of people reacted negatively against that. And so that's what we're chatting about. It's a fascinating topic. We're going to take a break and be back in 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Dr. Chitra Anand. She's a professor at Centennial College. She's a commentator on numerous different issues, organizational-wise, ESG-wise, etc. And recently, she commented on a comment that Don Lemon, a commentator, a host on CNN in the United States, made in regards to Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley is the former ambassador to the United Nations under Donald Trump, President Donald Trump, and she was the former governor of South Carolina. She just last week announced that she is running for president, or at least for the Republican nomination for president of the United States. And she said that she thought that in her announcement speech that everyone over 75 should take competency tests. And Don Lemon, along with a conversation with the other co-hosts of CNN, said, "This talk about age makes me uncomfortable. I think it is wrong. It is the wrong road to go down." She says that people, politicians or something, are not in their prime. I presume when they're over 75. Nikki Haley is not in her prime. Sorry. When a woman is considered to be in her prime, is her 20s and 30s and maybe 40s. And you reacted extremely negatively to that, as lots of other people did, including, frankly, one of his co-hosts who said prime for what? So I guess what Don Lemon is trying to say, even though we both agree he said it very poorly, is that age shouldn't be an issue. And over 75 shouldn't be an issue for competency. And if Nikki Haley makes age an issue for over 75, then someone's going to say that she's not in her prime at 50, which is, I think, a little bit surprising. But that's, I guess, what his argument is. So let me ask you, is Nikki Haley being ageist by saying that someone over the age of 75 should take a competency test?
I don't think that she is. And I don't think that she said anything that was illogical. Like, I'm just going back to logic. So, it's sort of the same rationale that you want somebody over 80. I believe that's the age to take a driving test every year, because that could be dangerous in terms of road safety. And when you think about outcomes, right? So it's really coming down to cognitive flexibility, cognitive function, cognitive sharpness. And when you have a role of such stature and importance, your cognitive capability is absolutely critical, because after 75, our bodies just naturally, there's a whole, there could be a myriad of issues. But, the way he responded back was really around, taking a shot, if you will, at women and, their ages, their capabilities, and this whole issue of prime, your prime age. And so, which is very, very subjective. And I think, like I said earlier, that the reason why the backlash happens so furiously is because of this tolerance or this fatigue that women are experiencing in the market and in the world at large right now, Brian, in terms of commentary on, their capabilities and skills, and then, coming from a male, just sort of made it even more sharper. So I think that's really the essence of that.
So asking for a competency test for someone above 75 is not ageist.
I think that it's logical. I believe that it's logical. In my humble opinion, I believe that it's logical. What she said made sense from when you're looking at what the outcome really is, kind of similar to my example of, just like how we have people over 80 do a driver's test every year. My father just had to do one, because for outcome based thinking in terms of safety, right? So you want to ensure that is a logical path forward.
Okay. And saying someone, a female is beyond her prime at 51, you think is wrong?
Yes.
Okay. I agree with both those comments. So what should happen to Don Lemon?
Well, I mean, that's very subjective. I think what's the tragedy in all this, Brian, is, and I think why the world erupted, is because for a couple of reasons. Number one is these labels. We are stuck in a time where we've got labels for almost everything, and labels categorize people. And in my humble opinion, I think labels divide people. It becomes divisive. Number two, you have people of power and influence making remarks with such strong statements. These people in positions of power. And so, people are taking a step back going, what is going on in the world that we're living in? As much as we are this evolved modern world, you have comments of such nature being made by people of influence. So that's even more disappointing. And thirdly is really around the lens through which people see the world. It's the lens that, how are we defining women's capabilities here? How are we defining prime? What does that actually mean? What are all the, multiple different interpretations that you can make around that? That's disappointing. So it's like a triage of different things that are happening that are buried into this comment that he made. And so, what should be done with him? That's a bigger question. I mean, I don't feel that I can, say what should be done. I guess what's more disappointing is, really what should be done is an apology should be issued. Absolutely. And people need to be course corrected. And I think that what needs to happen in this world is, people do make mistakes. We need to be forgiving. We need to allow for a platform where, education happens, right? I mean, nobody's perfect. We're human beings, we're flawed. And so we need to allow for people to course correct along the way. That's what I would say.
Given the Me Too movement of, the last couple of years and Harvey Weinstein and, all the different individuals that have been brought down by the Me Too movement, do we still have sexism in the workforce, the workplace?
100%. 100%.
100%.
100%.
I read a really interesting column by Rosie DiMano in the Toronto Star a week ago or so about the John Tory resignation. And we haven't talked about this, so I'm not sure if you have a point of view on this or not. But she had said that she thought that post the Me Too movement and the success and progress that females have made in the workplace and in society in general, she thought we were past the time where we saw any female in a subordinate position as a victim, that you could have a consensual relationship and that we didn't have to assume that somehow they were victimized and did it because they were forced into it or for advancement reasons, or that there was a casting couch or something like that. So do you agree? Is there an imbalance in the workforce such that any relationship between a superior and a subordinate is wrong?
Is there an imbalance? Well, I would say this, that there's a lot of relationships that happen in the workplace. And that's going to be very individual based on company to company. But the fact of the matter is we spend more time at work than we do at home. So, just by nature, relationships will develop. We spend more time with our work colleagues than we do with our family and our friends, because that's just what it is. So relationships will happen. The question then becomes, are there guiding principles on the types of relationships? Manager, subordinate, can you have consensual relationships, depending on, executives, etc. What is the tolerance and the guiding principles? And that's a very, very individual thing per company and policies, etc. Do they allow dating? Do they allow relationships, etc., etc.? So, the question on victim, again, I know many women that have been in certain situations where they had consensual relationships, but then on the flip side, there weren't, and they were still unfortunate circumstances. So it happens on both sides. What we need to do is set up environments and workplaces where you have support, where if there are unfortunate situations where you have outlets, people that you can talk to, support structures, et cetera, et cetera. But to say that we're no longer ever a victim, that's a strong statement, and I can't comment on that because it really depends on the situational agreements between the two parties.
But effectively what you're saying is that you don't always have to assume that there's an imbalance, such an imbalance that the female is a victim, that consensual relationships, not with peers, but with
yes.
a superior and a subordinate, can actually exist.
Can we have consensual relationships between superiors and subordinates? I think that we can. They have, as long as they're consensual, you've got two adults. You have to look at the implications of what that actually means. And you also have to look at, what are the guiding principles for those organizations, whether or not they deem that inappropriate or not. Those are within the paradigms of that organization.
Okay, so let me take you a step farther. Maybe this is a little controversial, but a lot of people may have said, yes, you could, but then they commented, but she was half his age. And then for some reason they thought that given the age imbalance, then it must have been deemed inappropriate because of the age imbalance.
I don't think that's relevant at all. It doesn't matter. I mean,
okay.
if they're two consenting adults, they're two consenting adults. It doesn't matter about their age gap. I don't think that that's relevant at all.
Okay, I agree with you as well, but it's interesting because lots of people did comment on that. And this past weekend, you may have noticed that Donald Trump, former President Donald Trump, tweeted out his pleasure of being at a wedding of someone who is supposedly worth $75 billion, is over 75 years old, marrying someone in her 20s, and that was deemed fantastic by him and shocking by a lot of people that saw the comment, saw the tweet. So, this is interesting. Age is going to be the number one issue, I think, in the upcoming election in the United States because of Biden's age, because Donald Trump, who may be a leading candidate, is currently the leading candidate for the Republican nomination, obviously is of a significant age as well. And then sex will be undoubtedly an issue, even if it's an untalked about issue in the Republican nomination if Nikki Haley is the leading candidate. And people are already commenting about both sex and race, given that the likelihood is, or there's certainly a possibility that Kamala Harris, the current vice president, will become president if something happens to Biden in this term or next, and was previously. How do you think about all those issues? We got ageism, we got sexism, we got racism. How's that all going to play out?
I have always been of the mindset, and I really try and keep myself as, I don't want to say as far removed, but I believe that it really comes down to skills and capabilities. I'm a visible minority woman. I don't like to label myself as that, but that is who I am based on how the world is moving and labeling people. But let me interrupt, but throw in,
I should have said something on that too. I'm not sure what you call it. Maybe it's racism, but lots of people are already commenting that Nikki Haley is the first one of Indian descent. Both her parents immigrated into the United States, and so she's a first generation. And so, what do you call that? I guess that's racism. I don't know. It's a new Americanism or something like that. A fear of immigration, a fear of newcomers.
I mean, like I said, my response to that is we are complicating things more than they need to be. I think that people need to be viewed as human beings. People need to be viewed by their competencies, their skills, their capabilities, and map that to what it is that you're trying to achieve. So whether it's a role, a candidacy, what is it that you're trying to achieve, and who in your pool of people is equipped based on your skills and competencies to achieve what it is you're trying to, what's the desired outcome. You want to map your outcomes to what's currently in play and take all that stuff out. Really, I find it, we're overcomplicating things in ways that we don't need to. And then we're starting to mix up stories and narratives and creating issues that may or may not be as forefront, where you're trying to assess, what is it that we're trying to achieve as a nation, as a community, as a society, and look at the people who are most equipped to do so.
Okay, and I agree with you, but regrettably, that's an idealistic, attitude that you've taken. And there's going to be a lot of comments about Biden and Trump and their age. There's going to be people that are going to be wondering about whether they slur their speech, or if they walk slowly, or if they walk down a gangplank off of an aircraft or a stage efficiently, quickly, or as if they're too old and somehow incapacitated. And I fear we're going to have lots of comments about Nikki Haley, Kamala Harris, their ethnicity, their race, whether they've got their hair right, or whether they're wearing too many pantsuits, etc. How do we stop all that? How do we change all that? Because I think you do. I think you'll admit that your idealistic attitude is in a minority, and there's a lot of people. Regrettably, they're going to have a lot of prejudices, and they're going to make comments, positive and negative.
Well, respectfully, I don't know if my ideas are ideological. I feel like part of what's making—
I didn't say ideological, I said idealistic.
Idealistic. I feel part of what's making these issues problematic is that we're focusing on the wrong things. We're focusing on the wrong things: race, religion, creed, gender. Who cares? Who cares? Let's focus on humans and people and what they're capable of doing. And we have gone down this rat hole, and quite frankly, it's exhausting. Almost to the point where you're not going to be able to progress forward because you're so fixated on things that are not going to help you achieve what it is that you're trying to achieve. If I spent my life and my career, Brian, frankly, focused on gender, race, ethnicity, I would not have achieved, and I wouldn't have moved forward, right? Progress means moving forward. And so if I had fixated on that, I would have created more complications for myself than I needed to. So you almost have to detach yourself from that and take a more a more programmatic, athletic approach to what it is that you're trying to do, and plow forward.
It's a great attitude. We're going to take a break, a final break, and come back with some concluding comments with Dr. Chitra Anand in just a minute. We're talking about a lot of things. We're talking about sexism. We're talking about ageism. We're talking about racism. We're talking about whether people should say things like when a man is too old and maybe doesn't have the competency to lead the most powerful country in the world, or whether it's at all appropriate to ever deem that someone, male or female, is in their best state. Interesting conversation. Stay with us. We'll be back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Dr. Chitra Anand. She's a professor at Centennial College. She's a commentator on numerous different issues in regards to organizations and environments, society, governance, ESG issues, etc. I've had the pleasure of chatting with her before. Tonight, we're talking about Don Lemon, the commentator on CNN, who made a comment about women in their prime, and specifically referencing Nikki Haley. I got to tell you, Dr. Anand, I actually think that this was very helpful that he made this comment, and I want to explain it this way. Don Lemon is thought of, he's African American. He's thought of as a very progressive commentator. Sometimes, frankly, some people think he's too, wokish is the word people will apply to him, and very progressive. And for him to make this comment and create such a backlash so quickly early on in the whole, primary process in the United States, I think it's really good. And I think it's really good because people are going to stop and think before they make comments. Do you agree? What do you think?
Yeah, I love that, Brian. It's a very astute comment, right? Because, part of, and I think I said this to you earlier, is what I think people took issue with is that, we are in 2023 and these comments are very pervasive in society at large, in workplaces, out of workplaces, on the news. And when you have people of such influence and power making these public comments, you have to think about, well, what are the implications of this? What are the signals that it's sending to the world on the progression of women? And so I think that's really what we need to think about is, how are women being viewed and what are these ideologies of women, even if it's, whether it's in their prime or not, or when they're bearing children, when they're optimal to do so, et cetera, et cetera. But it's really about, oh my goodness, we are, this is supposed to be one of the best times for women in the workplace. And we're still here. We're still here and we're hearing these comments, and then you have these movements like I talked about earlier, like the Great Breakup. Like we're doing reports on the Great Breakup because women are leaving the workplaces in unprecedented rates. We have to dig deeper and say, why is this happening? Why are these studies being done? Why are we still here? Why are, men getting promoted faster than women? Is there actually a funnel problem? What are we doing to address the funnel problem? Are processes broken? Like, what are we actually doing to look at these systemic issues to actually address the root of these problems? And so until we can do that, these comments are still going to happen over and over and over again, and they're just going to keep coming. But what I think is most important, Brian, is that we need to allow people to self-correct. Is that if you've made a comment or if you've behaved in a certain way, we need to allow for course correction to happen along the way. That's what I would say.
Dr. Chitra Anand, thank you so much for joining us and sharing with us your views. I think you're right that we have to have the ability to apologize. I think that course corrections are important. I think that people have at times have to admit when they're wrong and not be overly defensive. I do think that ageism is wrong, and I'm not sure about the competency test over the age of 75 for everyone. I think maybe it either should be applied to everyone or no one, because I do worry about competency tests at a certain age. But I understand your point about driver's tests over the age of 80, and so therefore maybe we've accepted that already. And I go get a PSA test every year because I'm over a certain age, and that's one of the things that's thought of as you got to do over a certain age. But I do think that ageism is wrong, sexism is wrong, racism is wrong, and I do think we have to try to rid this world of a lot of these isms. And I do think that when some people make misstatements, it is helpful because it allows us all to think about whether we agree with that statement or think it's a misstatement and think that the person should apologize. And if they do, maybe that's good, and maybe that all then teaches us what we've got to do in the future and how we've got to act and how we got to think and what we've got to do in regards to being careful about our own speech. And I do think that we're going to get a lot of it in the next 2 years in the United States because of this election. It's going to have two of the oldest candidates ever for president, and undoubtedly several females running for president or vice president of, in several cases, not white. And so that's going to be a change as well. And people are going to have to get used to it and think about it. And we'll see what comments get made. So it'll be an interesting interesting test about whether your attitudes are idealistic or my attitude that you're idealistic. And yet, even though you're idealistic, I hope you're right in the end. All right. That's our show for tonight. Thanks everyone for joining us. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online at www.saga960am. All my podcasts and videos are available on briancrombie.com. The podcasts are on numerous different podcast services, and the videos are on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Have a great night.